The engineer who sold you this land didn't account for the ventilation shaft, Miss Riley, the man on the secure line whispered, the voice layered with static and panic. The line clicked dead before Riley could even register the threat. She stared at the rusty steel door she'd paid $99 for, the cheap deal mocking her current reality. Her German Shepherd Duke wasn't interested in the dust. He was frantically pawing at a section of reinforced concrete near the floor drain. A low, persistent vibration resonated through the soles of her worn boots, shaking the stale air of the forgotten bunker. Duke let out a single, deep, territorial growl directed straight at the solid wall. This wasn't just a storage unit, it was a trap. The humid Arkansas air clung to Audrey Riley like damp cloth. But the air inside the bunker, 5 feet below the surface, was worse, dry, metallic and cold. She ran a gloved hand along the seam of the thick steel door, the hinges groaning in protest when she nudged it wider. This space, a decommissioned communication relay shelter, was supposed to be her Hail Mary, a cheap piece of property she could flip after cleaning up the surrounding scrap metal. Now, it just felt like another echo chamber for her failures. Audrey was 28, but the lines around her eyes suggested a decade more of constant vigilance. She wore faded canvas overalls and a thick leather work apron, layers meant to protect her from the sharp edges of the world. Her solitude wasn't a choice, it was the consequence of avoiding complexity. Her only true companion was Duke, who now kept his large body pressed against her knees, his head cocked toward the wall where the mysterious vibration persisted. The bunker was minimal. Concrete slab flooring, walls painted institutionally grey, and a single rusty cot in a corner. The meagre daylight filtering down the narrow hatch showed dust motes dancing in the stale atmosphere. Audrey moved with deliberate efficiency, gathering the tools she'd brought, a portable generator, a few heavy-duty lights, and a geotechnical sensor kit she'd borrowed. Everything she owned was portable, ready to be packed and moved at the first sign of instability. Her real estate ventures over the last 5 years had all cratered, leaving her with perfect credit but zero capital. The $99 bunker purchase was the last of her savings. She remembered her father's voice, flat and unyielding, 15 years ago. "You rely on yourself, Audrey. Anyone else is a liability." The scar wasn't visible, but the doctrine remained imprinted on her movements, swift, silent, reliant only on physics and metal. She set the generator outside the hatch and threaded the thick power cord down. When the fluorescent tubes flickered to life, the harsh light revealed a meticulously maintained emergency kit mounted on the wall, filled with supplies that looked strangely recent. Duke started whining, pulling hard on his leash toward the concrete floor near the back wall, where the sound was strongest. It wasn't just vibrating, it sounded like a heavy, synchronized machine operating deep beneath them. Audrey gripped the cold metal of a wrench, the cheap inheritance suddenly feeling lethal. The rhythmic hammering stopped abruptly around noon, replaced by the sound of a small, sputtering engine coming up the dirt track outside. Audrey, covered in concrete dust from chipping away at the floor drain, cautiously climbed the metal ladder. She emerged into the blinding sun and shielded her eyes. A pale blue 1990s pickup truck was parked 20 feet away, its bed laden with bags of mulch and 2 scuffed gardening tools. Standing beside it was a woman who looked permanently tired, but not defeated. She wore simple denim shorts and a thick cotton t-shirt, her hair pulled back tightly, revealing the effort etched into her face. This was Maya, the owner of the small, struggling nursery down the road according to the local zoning records. Beside her stood a child of about 6, small for his age, gripping the strap of an oversized canteen. Maya approached slowly, holding up a chipped thermos. "Found you," she said, her voice low and practical, devoid of pity. "Thought you might want coffee, not that instant stuff the old engineers left behind." Audrey hesitated, unused to unsolicited generosity. You didn't have to, she managed, her tone flat. Yes, I did. Nobody stays working this deep in July heat unless they're running from something or toward it, Maya responded, handing over the thermos. She didn't press for details. Her son, Finn, meanwhile, stood still, his attention fixed not on Audrey, but on Duke, who had followed Audrey up the hatch and now sat sentinel beside the opening. He's beautiful, Finn announced in a clear, unvarnished voice, taking a step closer. He didn't ask to pet the dog, he simply observed. Duke, Audrey supplied, watching the boy. Finn had the kind of sincerity that adults usually crushed out of themselves, a complete absorption in the present moment. Maya leaned against the truck's fender. We live in the old farmstead. Finn wants to be a dog whisperer. I'm just trying to keep the roses alive through this drought. She took a deep, weary breath, the simple admission of struggle, more connecting than any elaborate conversation. She didn't offer advice or intrusion. She offered coffee and proximity. Audrey took a long sip of the strong, sweet brew. It was the first genuinely kind thing she'd tasted in months. The small child shifted his gaze from Duke to Audrey, then back to the bunker entrance. "Do you have to wear a helmet to go down there?" he asked, pointing at the dust on her hair. Audrey managed a slight, almost painful smile. "If you're watching this story unfold, tell me where in the world you are right now. I love seeing how far these human stories travel." The connection began, not with words, but with shared labor. Audrey was struggling to pry open a concrete access panel near the bunker entrance. The source of the earlier vibration had moved, suggesting a mobile internal system. The panel was old, sealed by years of moisture and rust. She braced her boot against the edge, grunting with effort, the heavy bar slipping in her sweaty grasp. Maya, watching from her truck, didn't comment. She simply walked over, retrieved a specialized pry bar from her own toolbox, a sturdy, well-used piece of equipment, and handed it to Audrey. "Use this edge," she instructed, pointing to a thinner curve on the metal. "Leverage the angle, not the brute force." Audrey, a mechanical engineer by training, absorbed the practical advice instantly. She adjusted her stance and, with the right tool, the panel groaned, popped and yielded. The air escaping the new opening smelled sharply of ozone and cold, processed air, not dust, not decay. Something alive was being preserved down there. Maya didn't gloat. She just nodded, satisfied, and began stacking her gardening supplies. "Finn, help me get the mulch bags on the gate. We need the space clear before sunset." Finn immediately scrambled to assist, pushing a 50-pound bag with surprising grit. Audrey watched them. There was an economy of movement between mother and son. No nagging, no complaint, just mutual task completion. This was what real partnership looked like, she realized. Quiet, dependable effort. "The air down there," Audrey started, wiping her brow. "It's pressurized. Whatever is running, it's massive." "The previous owner, Mr. Hemlock, was secretive," Maya murmured, tying down the tarp. "He sold the land right before the federal investigations began a few years back. Everyone thought he was crazy, just a survivalist hoarding canned beans." "He sold it for 90 nans?" Audrey asked, incredulous. "He sold it for $99 to you because you're out of town, desperate and don't ask questions," Maya corrected gently. "The real price was in the liability. Come have dinner. Nothing fancy, just chili. You look like you haven't eaten a vegetable since spring." The invitation wasn't laced with pity or obligation. It was a practical solution to a practical problem, hunger. Audrey hesitated for only a second. Going inside, sharing space, it felt risky, but the metallic smell of the bunker was starting to feel oppressive. "Thank you, Maya," Audrey said, the words feeling rusty in her throat. Duke nudged her hand, clearly approving of the change in atmosphere. The silent space forming between the three of them, the damaged adult, the tired, gentle woman, and the observing child, was warmer than the July sun. Audrey sat at Maya's worn wooden kitchen table, eating slow-cooked chili out of a thick ceramic bowl. The farmhouse smelled of cinnamon and dry earth, a comforting, permanent smell. Finn was curled up on the rug, drawing a detailed picture of Duke guarding a large geometric shape that strangely resembled the bunker hatch. While Maya washed the dishes, Audrey pulled a silver keychain out of her pocket, fiddling with it beneath the table. It wasn't valuable, just a small, tarnished compass, slightly frozen, pointing perpetually southwest. The memory surfaced without warning, triggered by the secure warmth of the room. She was 8, standing alone in the parking lot of a large industrial park. Her father had given her the compass that morning, a lesson in independence, he'd called it. They were supposed to be meeting for lunch after his shift at the aerospace facility. He told her to find the closest bench and wait. "If you stray, the compass will tell you which way home is," he'd promised. She waited for 5 hours. The sun moved across the pavement, and the cold reality of the concrete started to leach into her thin jacket. Every car that passed felt like a momentary promise, quickly broken. When the security guard finally found her, trembling and silent, the industrial park was deserted. The next day, her father explained, without looking up from his paperwork, that a critical structural failure on the assembly line required his full attention. He hadn't forgotten, he had prioritized. "You are an adult in training, Audrey. You must learn that reliability is a luxury, not a guarantee." That event hadn't led to dramatic tears or shouting. It led to a quiet internalization of the lesson: do not wait for rescue. Do not need anyone. Audrey rubbed the frozen compass with her thumb. It was a physical reminder of the directional failure, a map leading nowhere. She had spent 2 decades following the compass's logic, relying entirely on her own internal engineering. Yet she had ended up in the same place, cold, alone, and waiting for the next structural failure. "You look far away," Maya noted, drying her hands. She didn't pry. It was an observation of physics, not emotion. Audrey tucked the compass back into her pocket, burying the sharp edge of the memory. "The man who sold me the bunker," she said instead, shifting the conversation back to safety. "Hemlock. He was involved in something big, and the bunker isn't just a shelter, it's a pressurized access point to something deeply hidden." Finn looked up from his drawing, his large eyes serious. "Is it treasure?" he asked. "It's usually never treasure, kid," Audrey replied, the old cynicism returning. "It's usually just someone else's mess." The chili led to a borrowed extension cord, which led to shared evenings. Audrey's work in the bunker, chipping away at the concrete and trying to understand the archaic internal systems, was dangerous and demanding. The nearest town was half an hour away. The natural progression was integration, born purely of necessity. Every afternoon, Audrey would emerge from the metal hatch, covered in dust and grit. Maya would be there, not waiting, but always nearby, watering the struggling petunias or stacking inventory. "The air compressor sounds stressed," Maya would observe, practical as ever. "I have a wrench set you can borrow. Better leverage." Audrey would take the tools, work silently for another hour, and then join them for dinner. Duke settled easily into the routine, sprawling on the cool kitchen tiles, allowing Finn to whisper long, elaborate stories into his ear about space pirates and loyal German shepherds. The bunker's structure was proving to be a highly advanced seismic vault, disguised as a Cold War relic. The internal machinery was not crude. It was highly specialized, emitting deep, low-frequency hums that Audrey was meticulously recording. She had uncovered a second, smaller, and newer access hatch, sealed with advanced electromagnetic locks. She found herself spending less time in calculated self-sufficiency and more time relying on the quiet domestic rhythm next door. She didn't talk about her past or her fear of the future, but she talked about metallurgy, structural integrity, and the strange, persistent electrical draw the bunker demanded. Maya listened, never interrupting, her presence a silent ballast. One evening, Finn insisted on reading a picture book aloud while Audrey cleaned the grease from her fingernails. It was a story about a hedgehog who couldn't find its way home. When he stumbled over a word, Audrey helped him sound it out. It was a mundane moment, yet it felt seismic to her. She hadn't tutored a child, read a story, or even simply sat in shared silence in an environment that wasn't a temporary rental or a borrowed office since she was 18. She noticed she was staying longer now, sometimes until the heat broke completely after 9 p.m., lingering over a glass of iced tea. It wasn't companionship she sought, but the strange, neutralizing effect of their company. Her perpetual state of alert, the high-frequency internal noise of constant calculation, would temporarily dampen in their presence. They weren't saving her. They were just providing a structure sturdy enough to rest against. The realization hit her sharply. She was becoming attached to the sheer lack of pretense. There were no expectations here, only the shared task of surviving the drought, raising a child, and occasionally opening a rusty $99 bunker. This fragile, unstated alliance was replacing the mechanical logic she had lived by. Audrey finally managed to bypass the electromagnetic lock. The inner hatch slid open with a controlled whoosh of escaping air, revealing not a vault of supplies, but a narrow, brightly lit staircase spiraling downward. The air that rushed out was clean, cold, and chemically scrubbed. Before she could descend, a piece of sophisticated satellite communication gear, disguised as a rusted ventilation fan, received a broadcast. The synthesized voice was urgent, cold, and looped. Protocol Delta 9 initiated. If this signal is received, access must be secured. Hemlock's proprietary information must be contained. We are inbound. Estimated time 24 hours. Audrey felt a cold wash of dread. This wasn't a bunker. It was a secure data relay for something catastrophic. She immediately began dismantling the receiver, trying to erase her digital footprint. That afternoon, Finn came running to the bunker, his face pale and tear-streaked. He held out a small, heavy black box, Audrey's encrypted recorder, which contained all her data logs, including the coordinates of the inbound signal. "I tried to help," he choked out, holding the box which now displayed a fatal error screen. "I pushed the wrong button. I just wanted to see what Duke was guarding." Audrey snatched the device, her careful control shattering. Months of painstaking, dangerous work, including the vital warning, instantly gone. Her engineering mind screamed at the catastrophic data loss. "Finn, you don't touch things that aren't yours," she snapped, the sound echoing harshly off the concrete. Her voice was sharp, laced with the deep fear that her vulnerability was now exposed, all because she had allowed a connection. "This isn't a game. You just ruined something important. Go." Finn froze, the simple command cutting him like glass. He had only ever encountered Maya's gentle limits, not this absolute rejection. He dropped his canteen and fled back toward the farmstead. Minutes later, Maya arrived, her expression tight and worn. She didn't shout. She simply observed the broken screen in Audrey's hand and the dust still settling from Finn's frantic escape. "He's 6, Audrey," Maya said, her voice steady but laced with deep disappointment. "He broke a machine. You broke his trust. He thought he was protecting your dog. I told him to stay away. This is serious, Maya. People are coming here. Dangerous people. I can't afford these distractions." The words tumbled out, revealing her true motivation. Fear of abandonment masked as self-preservation. "Distraction," Maya repeated, the word hitting the air like a final, definitive period. "That's what connection looks like to you, isn't it? Something that gums up the works. When you figure out how to be safe without being entirely alone, you can call." She turned and walked away, not looking back, leaving Audrey standing alone at the mouth of the terrifying, deep hole she had bought for $99. The feeling of belonging, fragile as glass, was instantly pulverized. She looked at the black hole in the earth, then at the empty road where Maya and Finn had vanished, and understood the true cost of her blunt rejection. The sense of loss was immediate, hollow, and far deeper than the loss of Data. Audrey spent the next hour working with brutal focus, not on the destroyed recorder, but on the bunker itself. She realized that the people Hemlock warned her about wouldn't stop at the property line. They were coming for the Data, and if the farmstead next door was collateral damage, they wouldn't hesitate. Her survival instinct, honed by decades of self-reliance, battled with a new, raw compulsion: protect the vulnerability she had been allowed to witness. She descended the newly opened staircase. It led to a small, hermetically sealed server room, freezing cold and lined with industrial hard drives. This wasn't military. It was corporate espionage, built to survive an economic collapse. The true $300 million secret wasn't a vault of cash, but the complete operational plan for a black market pharmaceutical network, Hemlock's insurance against his capture. Audrey grabbed a thick coil of fiber-optic cable and went back upstairs. She couldn't stop the signal or the incoming security team, but she could divert the target. She spent the entire night running the heavy cable, digging trenches by flashlight, and threading the line from the bunker's main terminal beneath the dirt track and into the dense cluster of oak trees bordering Maya's property. Her hands bled, her muscles screamed, but she worked with an almost manic intensity. She built a sophisticated external relay, a dummy station, using an old satellite dish and a low-frequency repeater she had kept in Duke's carrier bag for years. This rig was designed to capture the incoming signal, amplify it, and relay the bunker's coordinates 3 miles west, into the deepest, unpopulated stretch of the national forest. She was creating a decoy, diverting the inbound threat away from the farmhouse. The work was purely mechanical, but the motivation was visceral. She wasn't saving a machine. She was saving the rhythm of a kitchen, the sincerity of a child, the quiet presence of a tired woman who had simply offered coffee. She wasn't seeking forgiveness from Finn. She was acting to ensure that his reality, the safe, solid reality of his home, remained intact. As the pre-dawn light cracked the horizon, she activated the decoy. The old relay dish hummed to life, pulsing a strong, fake signal. The original broadcast from the bunker went silent as the system locked onto the new, false coordinates. The decision was final. She was sacrificing her position, her only asset, and potentially her freedom to protect the people who had offered her temporary safety. She secured the bunker hatch, sealed the exterior access panel permanently with industrial-grade epoxy, and grabbed her duffel bag. She didn't wait for the incoming threat. She just walked away, leading Duke, leaving the $99 bunker to become a highly dangerous, empty decoy. Audrey walked 2 miles down the dusty road, her pack heavy, Duke trotting beside her. She had planned to hitchhike out of the county and vanish, allowing the consequences of the diversion to fall on an empty landscape. But she stopped. The internal noise, the fear, the calculation, was deafening. She had to see them once more, not to explain, but to ensure they were safe. She doubled back toward the farmhouse, moving slowly through the dense brush bordering the field. As she crested the small rise, she saw it. A black, unmarked SUV was parked directly in front of the bunker's sealed entrance. 2 men in dark suits were surveying the property, their movements sharp and professional. They were too late for the real prize, now miles away. But they were still a threat. Audrey froze, pulling Duke low into the tall grass. The men moved toward the farmhouse, clearly intending to interrogate the neighbors. Before she could intervene, Finn appeared on the porch, holding his canteen and looking toward the men with the wide-eyed curiosity of a child who had never encountered true threat. "Where is the woman who owns the land?" one of the men demanded, his voice tight with impatience. Maya emerged, her hands covered in garden soil. She looked exhausted, but her posture was rigid. "The land has been abandoned for days. She packed up and left last night. No forwarding address." "We know she was using a sophisticated data relay," the second man pressed, his eyes scanning the windows. Maya met his gaze without flinching, a complete wall of domestic normalcy. All she had was a very loud generator and a very big dog. Maybe she took the dog. The first man pointed toward the sealed bunker entrance, now covered in a thin layer of dry earth Audrey had scattered. "The external access panel is sealed with industrial-grade epoxy. No one leaves a property like that unless they're hiding something." Maya took a small, deliberate step, positioning her body slightly in front of Finn. Maybe she just got tired of digging. Some people realize they're better off leaving the mess behind. The men exchanged frustrated glances. They weren't prepared for quiet resilience. They were prepared for panic or cooperation. Eventually, they retreated to their vehicle, driving toward the general direction of the diverted signal. When the SUV was a distant speck, Audrey stood up, brushing the dirt from her overalls. She started to walk away again, convinced her job was done. "Audrey," it was Finn's voice, clear and soft. He had seen her standing in the tall grass. He walked toward her, not running, and stopped a few feet away. He didn't mention the broken recorder or the harsh words. He simply held up a small, smooth river stone, dark and cool. "Duke told me you were sad," he whispered, offering the stone. "He said you needed a keeper." Audrey accepted the stone, her hand trembling slightly. It was a concrete replacement for the broken compass, something real, solid, and given without expectation. She knelt down, unable to speak, and simply put her hand on Finn's shoulder. A silent apology and a promise rolled into one. Audrey didn't leave. When the dust from the black SUV had settled completely, Maya simply opened the screen door of the farmhouse and gestured inside. It wasn't a demanding invitation, just a quiet acknowledgement that the threat was over and the choice to stay or go was now hers alone. Audrey went in. The light inside the kitchen was warm, filtered through the gingham curtains. The air was heavy with the smell of freshly baked bread. Maya was already back at the sink, rinsing soil from a basket of carrots, the picture of weary, unassailable domesticity. "They'll be back," Audrey stated quietly, leaning against the doorframe. "When they realize the decoy is empty, they will return to the source." "Then we'll be ready," Maya replied, her gaze steady. She didn't ask Audrey to stay, nor did she demand an explanation for the high-stakes games Audrey had played. She simply accepted the shared danger. Finn, reassured, was back to whispering to Duke, who was now peacefully chewing on an old tennis ball. Audrey placed the river stone on the windowsill next to a vase of wilting yet determined sunflowers. It was a foundation stone for a structure she hadn't known she needed. Audrey wasn't poor anymore. She had traded a $99 liability for something invaluable, a chance to choose protection over escape. The farmstead was a world away from the stainless steel and concrete of her father's lessons. Here, strength wasn't measured in distance or independence, but in proximity and accountability. She picked up a worn sanding block lying on the counter, noticing a chair with a loose rung. "That needs a bit of bracing," she murmured, already assessing the structural flaw. Maya smiled, a small, tired uplift of her lips that carried immense weight. "You're an engineer, not a runaway, Audrey. We need a new fence built. The drought is splitting the wood." The silence in the kitchen wasn't empty. It was full of mutual, unspoken consent. They weren't bloodkin, and there were no grand declarations of friendship. They were simply three people, a damaged adult, a resilient mother, and an observing child, plus one dog, standing on the same ground, facing the future together. Family, Audrey realized, wasn't about inheritance or planning. It was about the small, daily choice to stay and fix the broken things, including the people around you. The bunker had led her to a $300 million secret, but the real treasure wasn't the data. It was the warmth radiating from a cheap wooden kitchen chair she was about to fix. She finally put down her duffel bag, the gesture feeling heavier than any piece of equipment. If this story about choosing belonging over self-reliance resonated with you, please hit the like button. Tell us in the comments what defining moment made you realize you couldn't do it alone. And subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into human connection.